Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to get into this one today because we're tackling a topic that has quite literally captured the world's imagination for decades. From blockbuster movies to those late-night internet rabbit holes we've all fallen down, the global obsession with Area 51 is just undeniable. But here's the thing, behind all that pop culture hype lies a verified historical reality that is honestly far more fascinating than any science fiction story. So what actually forced the creation of the world's most famous secret base? 1.7 million. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this mythology, just think about that number for a second. Back in 2019, a staggering 1.7 million people RSVP'd to a Facebook event titled Storm Area 51, They Can't Stop All of Us. And their stated goal? To, quote, see them aliens. Now, obviously, it was a masterclass in internet absurdity and dry humor, but it perfectly highlights just how deeply this idea of a secret, alien-hoarding government base is permanently embedded in our collective psyche. But that brings us to the pivotal question, right? If we strip away the internet memes, the tinfoil hats, and the Hollywood movies, what is the U.S. government actually hiding out there in the Nevada desert? Like, what truly necessitated building a facility wrapped in such intense, uncompromising secrecy? Well, the answer isn't extraterrestrial, but I promise you it does involve some of the most spectacular leaps in human engineering we have ever seen. Which brings us to Section 1, the ultimate desert secret. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this. It's April 12th, 1955. Richard Bissell from the CIA and Kelly Johnson, the legendary director of Lockheed Skunk Works, are flying over Nevada in a tiny Beechcraft plane. They were desperately searching for a site so remote, so utterly cut off from the rest of civilization, that they could safely and secretly test a revolutionary new spy plane called the U-2. Eventually, they spotted this incredibly isolated salt flat out in the Mojave Desert, right next to the Atomic Energy Commission's Nevada Proving Ground, and they just knew instantly they had found their spot. Now, imagine trying to convince highly paid defense contractors to actually pack up and move to a barren, totally inhospitable wasteland. To pull it off, Kelly Johnson gave the place a rather, let's say, ironic nickname, Paradise Ranch. Soon enough, insiders were just calling it the ranch. This territory, which was designated on grid maps as Area 51, got officially folded into the Nevada test site. But it leaves you wondering, what kind of revolutionary tech were they actually building out there that required such an elaborate charade? Section 2, Project Aquatone and the U-2. During this era, known as Project Aquatone, the Cold War was really ramping up. The threat of nuclear conflict was looming over everything, and the CIA desperately needed eyes in the sky. So, to make this happen, they paved a runway at the site and dubbed it the Watertown Strip. And you have to understand, everything, literally everything, happening at Groom Lake was classified as top secret/sensitive compartmented information, or TS/SCI. As aviation historian Chris Pocock has thoroughly verified, the CIA took primary responsibility for all security, ensuring this overhead reconnaissance remained completely untraceable. I mean, they had to invent incredibly complex procedures just to hide massive numbers of defense contracts from the public record. Now, what's really interesting about this phase is the sheer escalation. By 1959, the base expanded for Project Oxcart, which focused on the Lockheed A-12. The technological leap here was just mind-blowing. We're talking about aircraft capable of Mach 3.3 speeds. That is over 3 times the speed of sound, pushing altitudes of 90,000 feet. They were actively building futuristic interceptors, motherships, and unpiloted drones. This was absolute bleeding-edge futuristic tech. But, when you push the absolute limits of aerospace engineering, things inevitably go wrong. So, what extreme lengths did the government go to in order to protect these secrets when disaster actually struck? Section 3, the price of secrecy. The developments of these black projects required incredibly aggressive government cover-ups, and tragically, it came with a very real human cost. Let's look at a crash that perfectly captures the sheer panic of an aerospace cover-up. On May 24, 1963, a highly classified A-12 jet, known internally as Article 123, crashed near Wendover, Utah. The pilot, Kenneth S. Collins, thankfully survived, but the government immediately went into absolute overdrive to hide what he was actually flying. In official records and press releases, the CIA completely fabricated a story, claiming it was just a standard Republic F-105 Thunderchief. They even went so far as to tell nearby farmers that the downed plane was loaded with atomic weapons, literally just to terrify them into staying far, far away from the wreckage. And they didn't just use fear. They brought out the checkbook. The CIA actually paid local law enforcement and civilian witnesses $25,000 in cash to keep quiet about the crash. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly equivalent to $263,000 today. The project had incredibly deep pockets to maintain this illusion. For instance, contracted security guards were living rent-free on the base, and they even had chefs flown in from Las Vegas on standby 24/7 to serve them Maine lobster right in the middle of the desert. But seriously, you have to wonder, how did witnessing giant cash payouts and bizarre military cover-ups end up fueling civilian suspicion over the decades? Well, before we get to those civilian suspicions, we really need to take a moment to acknowledge the true price paid for this innovation. Because real test pilots lost their lives pushing these machines to the absolute edge of the atmosphere. In 1966, Ray Torek tragically drowned after ejecting over the Pacific Ocean during a drone launch that went wrong. And in 1967, Walt Ray was killed when his A-12 ran out of fuel and he couldn't separate from his ejection seat. When you juxtapose the profound reverence we should have for these incredibly brave historical figures against the bizarre, cartoonish alien rumors that later engulfed the base, the contrast is honestly pretty staggering. Section 4, Space Invaders and Public Myths. So the crucial point here is separating the wild, unverified internet conspiracy theories from the verified black projects. For decades, theorists claimed Area 51 was reversing engineering crashed Roswell spacecraft, holding joint summit meetings with extraterrestrials, or developing wild sci-fi tech like weather control and time travel. But the verified reality? The reality wasn't time travel. It was the U-2, Mach 3 jets, and DITCOM systems designed to test radar evasion for stealth aircraft like the F-117A Nighthawk and the B-2 Spirit bomber. Everyday civilians definitely were spotting impossible-looking futuristic shapes in the sky. They just weren't from Mars. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate irony of Area 51. I mean, ask yourself, did the government's own silence accidentally invent the modern UFO myth? When the news media and curious locals naturally started asking questions about strange blazing lights in the sky, the Air Force responded with stony silence and terse denials. You had armed camo dudes patrolling the perimeter with authorization to use lethal force. This intense, heavily armed security cordon organically evolved into flying saucer hysteria by the late 1980s. And honestly, it served as a highly effective, albeit totally unintentional smokescreen for the actual Cold War espionage technology being developed right under everyone's noses. Section 5. Declassified. Fact versus fiction. Let's move to the timeline and see how this truth finally trickled out, because it was a slow, heavily litigated drip. In 1995, President Bill Clinton explicitly exempted the operating location near Groom Lake from environmental disclosure laws just to protect classified information. It wasn't until 1998 that the U.S. Air Force even officially acknowledged the site's existence. But the real breakthrough? That came in 2013, all thanks to a 2005 Freedom of Information Act request by Jeffrey T. Rickelson from George Washington University's National Security Archive. His persistence literally forced the CIA to finally release their official, unredacted history of the site. And when you actually dig into those CIA documents declassified in 2013, the facility's sole purpose was advanced aviation and Cold War espionage testing. Period. The records explicitly detail the U-2 and Oxcart programs, definitively separating the verified historical facts from all that extraterrestrial folklore. There are absolutely no mentions of alien autopsies, no underground saucer hangars, just brilliant engineers, incredibly brave test pilots, and the absolute highest stakes of the Cold War. Which leaves us with this final thought for today's explainer. When you really take a step back and consider the billion-dollar black budgets, the jets flying at 3 times the speed of sound at the very edge of space, the literal bags of cash handed to Utah farmers, and the men who gave their lives pushing the boundaries of human flight, is the verified history of American aerospace engineering actually wilder than the science fiction we invented to explain it? I'll leave you to ponder that one. Thank you so much for joining me today, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.